Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, we're back with another episode of The Singles, and we are going to talk about everything from Ibiza Final Boss to Lavazza coffee. In between all of that, we will chat about American Eagle. Of course, we have to touch on that. And we are going to talk about the British Grand Prix. We touched on Formula One before, and I had Ellie Norman as a guest on the podcast previously. But we're going to talk specifically about the British Grand Prix. We're going to talk about Jet2 holidays. We're going to talk about Oasis. So much to cover. And of course, as always, it is powered by the wonderful data we get from Tracksuit. So we have our views, we have our opinions, and we're not afraid to share them, but we are backed by data. And of course, these episodes are in partnership with Tracksuit, the always-on, affordable brand tracking dashboard. And it's an amazing, powerful platform for you to use for brands that really, maybe before this has been out of your reach, or you've been doing this once or twice a year. Now brand tracking can be always on for you, your brand, your entire organization. You can share the dashboard, you can share the knowledge across the organization, and people can see the impact of not just brand campaigns, but the entire organization in terms of your funnel, your brand health statements. It is really, really incredibly powerful to use. And of course, the team at Tracksuit are standing by and waiting to hear from you. So go to gotracksuit.com and find out how to get in touch with the team. And I leave Dan and Jasper's contact details in the show notes, so you can go track them down as well. And it's not just for brand side marketers, of course. If you are an agency as well, they're partnering with agencies across markets: UK, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, Canada, US. Did I say US already? And of course Ireland. And it is a dashboard that is out there and is ready to be used for everybody. Well, listen, if you are enjoying That's What I Call Marketing and can rate or review episodes, it really is a powerful way for us to reach a new audience. Algorithms are changing all over the place. You might have seen stuff from Fergus O'Carroll on LinkedIn recently where he was questioning how his organic posts are not getting any reach anymore. And it's not from his page, it's from his personal account. It is harder and harder to reach people. And so if you can help us by sharing an episode, reposting something you see on LinkedIn, or rating or reviewing, it is a great way for us to reach a new audience. Well, with all of that said, let's get into today's wonderful episode of The Singles, brought to you by Tracksuit. Dan and Jasper, great to see you. Your people who aren't watching won't realize the guys are wearing uniform. I'll mention John Evans, the John Evans back to black t-shirt uniform. I'll have to send you over some of my crappy t-shirts. I don't know if you heard my episode with Caroline from The Real. I'm sure you did. Of course you did. But obviously she's in the whole luxury fashion space and resell of luxury fashion. And I'm sitting there in my crappy different t-shirts talking about luxury fashion. So anyway, she knows a lot more than I do, so it's worth a listen. But listen, talking of fashion, probably the biggest story, not just in marketing, but out of marketing, has been American Eagle and Sydney Sweeney. And the ad obviously came out. You know, Sydney Sweeney has blue jeans, and there was a lot of controversy, which we probably touch on a little bit, because I think there's some views on, you know, where it could go right or wrong, and other strategies that I think can work. But one of the things I was really interested in was the data you guys have on American Eagle that could have led up to their decision to go down this route.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we have been tracking them over in the US, and we've noticed from a funnel metric perspective, quite an interesting story over the last sort of 18 months or so. And effectively, to summarize that into a headline, it's that their brand has been losing momentum. So from January of last year through to July of this year, all of their core brand funnel metrics have dropped. So awareness was down 6 percentage points, consideration was down 5 points, usage down 6, and preference was also down by 5. So whilst that might not sound like a huge dent on paper, in human terms, what that actually equates to is around 11 million people fewer who are aware of the brand, and nearly 12 million fewer people who are buying from them, which obviously is a pretty stark decline just across the board. But I think where we're noticing this funnel drop of being particularly concerning from a funnel performance perspective is around their conversion efficiency. So their consideration to preference, that conversion has dropped from 31 to 22%, which is a 9-point slide. And obviously in a highly competitive category, such as clothing, where the sort of switch between brands is easy and emotional loyalty matters, that is obviously quite a big, quite a big
when you put it in real numbers, like that's 11, 12 million people is a lot of people that are just not engaging with the brand. And then it's interesting that it seems to be, who was still buying the brand or who's engaged with the brand is younger women.
Yeah.
And what's the data telling you on kind of the audience breakdown?
Yeah, so we essentially track category level data so that brands can understand what their buying pool is at large and essentially where they're under and over indexing across key demographics, which is naturally essential information for brands who are looking to identify growth opportunities or to drive marketing efficiency through their strategy. And whilst we've noticed those brand metrics at large are declining, as I mentioned, their core buying base remains overwhelmingly young women. So what we found is that 55% of American Eagles buyers are and they skew slightly younger than the overall clothing category. So essentially, I think now that we've got that visibility on their core demographics skewing towards younger women, it sort of, I suppose, begs that question as to whether they're setting out to achieve what they're setting out to achieve with this campaign, and ultimately whether it could be easy to say it was appealing to a male demographic or whether it was still looking to lean toward, I suppose, that core buying demographic.
Yeah, because I think that's probably the controversy of it all is how disconnected does it seem from their core audience? And Sydney Sweeney has been a celebrity endorsement for a number of brands. For example, Dr. Squatch, which within like male personal care. And so seeing the likes of a celebrity endorsement used for American Eagle, unsurprising, needed to do something big. Momentum in their brand health is dropping. But then the way that it was executed just really poses the question of like, is there just a huge disconnect from who they actually think their audience is versus what their audience sees themselves as?
Yeah.
Not sure if that is what's driving the controversy, is just the wild disconnect.
Yeah. And I think also just to build on it, and again, sort of to touch back onto that broader brand funnel performance, I think if that's notable data points from their side of things to be able to be reviewing and to be incorporating into their strategy. So to Dan's point, from an executional perspective or sort of the direction that we're looking to head, that could well have played into it, because if they do have that very specific younger female demographic who are their core buyers, essentially, it could well have been a play to almost look to sort of diversify who that buying pool is, but not necessarily just from a bottom funnel perspective, but also sort of right the way down through it.
I'm going to guess there was a bit of research done on their side. Kind of Sydney Sweeney may have been a crossover, as in, appeals to their core demographic, but would also appeal to their non-core demographic. Obviously, the controversy seemed to blow up over the wording and the phrasing. And I find it probably hard to believe that they didn't know or think, that word jeans was going to be a bit of a fire that they were going to light in a very charged US market right now. There's just that emotional charging that they seem to lean into, and they seem to suggest that they kind of knew that they were doing that.
And do you feel with that, like, I mean, if you do believe that part of the plan was to drive controversy and discourse, I mean, they saw a incredible uptick in stock price. I think following Monday, 23% lift. Was it like, is that all part of the plan to drive controversy, to drive that buzz, to drive attention? If so, arguably successful, but then how much of that attention is actually going to lead to like a core connection back to their audience to deliver like sustained brand health, as opposed to like that shot in the pan moment in time, drive attention, drive discussion, and then kind of fall back to where they were sitting.
And that's kind of what it feels like. It feels like it's it's a short, sharp injection for them, and it doesn't lean into, like, if you look at the work of cultural strategy, Doug Hall, Doug Cameron, and you look at that, like, actually when you observe culture and you kind of have something to say within culture, then there's a role for a brand, that can play. And so I think what this was kind of trying to create a moment of culture without actually it being in any way kind of embedded into what the brand stood for.
Yeah.
And do you think knowing that, like, to build like sustained brand health, we know the power of consistently building on a brand platform. Do you iterate off the back of the controversy that's been driven here, or do you kind of would you follow down this path if you were American Eagle?
If they had other elements of the campaign that were coming out after that had the same use of the line, then it works, right? Because then there's actually something behind it. There's a brand platform, there's a brand idea. Do you double down on kind of this? Like, do we double down on that? Like, I genuinely don't know, because the pressure could come from the shareholder saying, this worked, give us more of those bumps. Like, it's a really interesting one, but it's the long-term effect on the brand that would just be the most interesting thing to observe.
Yeah. There was a really interesting piece in the Drum actually that I was reading, who had conducted this survey about the brand. Effectively, the conclusive findings from this were that most consumers would still consider buying American Eagle jeans. And I think there was a really interesting post that we obviously, at Tracksuit with Mr. Mark Ritson, he posted a really interesting response to it. And it effectively was just doubling down on the importance of market orientation. And as he was emphasizing, marketers aren't the market and they don't think like them. So things like assumptions, gut instinct, or commentary ultimately don't replace real consumer insight and data. So I think to the point of what does next steps look like for American Eagle, should we hypothetically be the team or be thinking to sort of what that trajectory looks like, I think it's about just continuously making sure any direction that is moved in is ultimately data driven and is underpinned by that, and isn't almost sort of these visceral reactions based on cultural commentary.
Yeah. And it, for me, like, I think one of the things was like, fame is a strategy, works, right? And so I was looking at this going, if this was a fame strategy, again, it's a short-term one, and actually fame as a strategy is more of a long-term play, right? And so I just, again, for me, it just kind of felt there was an emptiness to it. And I'd almost love to see the next iteration of it, and actually for it to be like, we're building a strategy, we want to be famous, and applaud them for that, and kind of whether that's a doubling down or kind of a different take on the same sort of idea. I just think kind of building a brand that's famous is a really good idea.
Yeah. And it will be, because I think also, again, something we've touched on previously is also sort of the power of consistency. So whether or not this is something that they do look to almost really kind of double down on, and I suppose sort of, for lack of a better phrase, given sort of the context of that cultural commentary that we've spoken to, kind of like steer into the skid and kind of really like lean into it, whether or not, like, if they do kind of look to progress there, what those longer term impacts could be. Because as we highlighted, as we sort of kick the segment off, their funnel metrics across the board have been on a decline over the past 18 months. So in order to sort of see that shift and look to see whether the sort of needle does move, it will be interesting back to that sort of, I suppose it's that challenge, isn't it, of like, do we pursue consistency knowing its importance, or do we pivot? And
what's the ideology that is under all of this? Like, that's what it kind of just needs, doesn't it? That kind of credible ideology that's articulated, and it may well be. And that's kind of it's always the interesting thing from the outside looking in. You're kind of going, what, like, was there a thing, or was it literally, at the senior leadership team looking at all their metrics going, we are in the toilet. Like, do something. I don't care what you do. Do something, make noise, be controversial. Like, we're in a charged environment here, like, lean in, and if that was the strategy, it worked. But maybe there's something deeper behind it, which would be wonderful. And we'll see what comes next.
Yeah. And we'll see how, I guess, on the brand health side, measuring that, but then equally just on financial side, like, will that market uplift be sustained, or is it flash in the pan until they kind of consistently hit and unearth the message that they're trying?
I think Mark Ritson said a few trendies were offended, written from Ritson Towers in Tasmania. But what was interesting, I think, with this one, as I said at the start, is it it went past marketing, like, radio stations, like it was in like mainstream news, which, a lot of brands don't get there, right? And so I'm sure all the media equivalency value stuff is stacking up and they're going, this is paid for itself. Fucking amazing. So it's just, we'll see where it goes.
What is measure of success from the campaign internally that they're trying to optimize for?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So look, anyone from American Eagle wants to get in touch, I would love to talk to you about what went on behind the campaign. Like, genuinely, I think it's fascinating because we can all have our views, but if you want to find out more about Tracksuit, go to gotracksuit.com and find out how they can be your affordable, always on brand tracking dashboard. Cool. Well, look, we'll move on from American Eagle, and we're in the midst of a Grand Prix gap. But the British Grand Prix obviously finished off, and it's kind of a good example, I think, of all things Formula One. Where's the growth coming from for the likes of the British Grand Prix? Because if they had a Grand Prix of Grand Prix, it would be the Grand Prix.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think we've covered Formula One a few times, which has been great, but then specifically narrowing in on the British Grand Prix as a location within like the broader year. It's interesting to see when we look at the category that we're tracking them within, events and amusements in the UK, and that's alongside the likes of Wimbledon and Glastonbury. It's been pretty incredible to see how their funnel as an event, as an amusement within the year has grown over time. And it sits, as you'd expect, at 77% awareness. But where really we're seeing the funnel strength come from is preference, and seeing that there's been a 5 percentage point increase in 2025 alone. So roughly about 2 million more Brits who prefer the British Grand Prix as their event or amusement within the category is quite remarkable brand growth in such a short period of time. And then narrowing in of who is or what is the audience driving that uplift. It is actually really feeding off the content revolution they've done through Drive to Survive, and this focus on social is coming from 18 to 34-year-olds. And that uplift is just a remarkable 8 points, which is roughly 1 million people within that age demographic that are now preferring the British Grand Prix, which, as we always harp on within Tracksuit, it's always a top of funnel game until you get to a certain point where it's how do we improve and strengthen our bottom of funnel, which is such a difficult metric move, being preference. There's a weird difference to American Eagle here in the sense, when we look at core and non-core audiences, we are starting to find this demographic gap starting to emerge within F1. And so when we think about a core audience and who they really speak to, it is male skewed. There seems to be a female preference gap emerging where only 9% of preference is driven by women. Whereas when we compare that to the overall amusement category, there's 29% is the category average within the female demographic. And so that core audience that's starting to emerge or has emerged for F1 and the British Grand Prix in particular is male skewed audience. And there seems to be just a significant opportunity within the female demographic to start to build preference, not necessarily awareness, but start to compete with the Wimbledons and the Glastonburys of the world.
And you know what, I'd be honest, I was kind of a little bit surprised, I think, at that, that breakdown, because in my head, I kind of thought done such a great job of bringing in not just a new audience, but a very split audience. But as you say, when it comes to this as an event, I love the fact that you're able to track events, but these kind of large scale, amazing, and kind of comparing it against the category, right? That's really interesting to see actually where there's better divides amongst the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because it feels like the focus has been on media habits and how do you split the content into different formats that drive Gen Z and drive that demographic between 18 and 24-year-olds, regardless of gender split. And so it feels like in terms of how they've landed on Instagram, TikTok, Netflix, from a media diet point of view, they're nailing how they capture and disseminate their content. But then I'm just not sure if how they I guess in terms of F1 in who are driving, who are the narrative storytellers tend to be the drivers, and it is still such a male sport that is it a world where they just need to start to surface more
Yeah.
women within the sport to be the storytellers to help drive that resonance and preference within that side of the category? And so, not too sure. It would be one of those things where I'd love to know, like, how are they looking at the data? How are they thinking about it? Because they have seen that cut through with the younger demographic. And some of the brand perceptions that we're starting to see are like really phenomenal emotional perceptions, like exciting, fun, fast. But then it's not quite resonating with the female demographic.
I suppose, like, if we were to look at, an adjacent sport, and if we were to look at football as an example, and when you see, obviously, the Lionesses who have just had, an unbelievable tournament, bringing it home for the second time. I think when you look at when you look, it was on my bingo card. But when you look at the journey that like women's football's been on over the past sort of few years, for example, it's incredible to see how, again, on what was a very traditionally male-dominated sport, traditionally very kind of by that I mean both played but also watched and attended and viewed, to now where you have so much buzz and hype and prominency around not just the international women's teams, but also across sort of the league football. Obviously, as we all know, I'm a big Chelsea fan, and the Chelsea women's team has also obviously been playing at the Bridge and selling out the stadium. So it's sort of, it's amazing to see sort of how that shift, for example, in football as a sport has taken place. So you wonder, just to Dan's point there again, from an F1 perspective, how if, for example, looking forward, we were to see more of a female present, whether it be in the sort of the driver's seat or wherever, sort of, but involved within the sport, how that could look to really start to break down those barriers that, as we are seeing within our data, as Dan's highlighted, is still skewing very
to your point, Jasper, like if there was, and there may well be that vision that in 5 years' time or whatever many years' time, like there's a 50-50 split on the grid. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Or, how that comes about. But I agree. I think women's football is a brilliant example of how they've just transformed something. People didn't care. Like wasn't on TV. It wasn't getting any visibility.
And I think it's also the impact it has, not necessarily just sort of at the top, but the influence as to how that trickles down right the way down through to grassroots. And I've been seeing a lot of people, certainly within my kind of immediate social and family circle, whose young girls are really wanting to play football and are going to join the local girls team to play on weekends and things like that, which is amazing. Thinking again, longer term, back to that future demand piece, as we talk about Tracksuit, sort of how that can then capture sort of these newer generations coming in who are born into it, who view the sport as something that is accessible and something that they want to be involved in right from the get-go.
And we'll not continue down the complete rabbit hole, but and people have views on boxing, but boxing's another one. Katie Taylor's selling out the first all women's card.
The one thing I was just going to touch on, we are starting to see the F1 make investments targeted into bringing more women into the sport. And you're seeing that from the F1 Academy that they've launched in terms of that Gen Z pool that they're capturing. It's skewing more towards women as it throughout 2025. And then even just the sponsorships that they're starting to bring into the sport. So Charlotte Tilbury and a few others is it does feel like they're capitalizing on how do we now focus on this audience? And to your point, Jasper, think about it from a future demand point of view.
The next one, we talk about coffee, and I was fascinated with this. And this, we're looking at kind of some US data here. Coffee must be just like one of the most competitive categories. And so I was struck by in the US coffee market, it's almost one of the most mature out there, probably not surprising, but 77% penetration. If you're a coffee brand in the US, you're kind of going, okay, big market opportunity.
Yeah, completely. And I suppose for context for the listeners, that's 77% of category penetration equates to around 196 million adults who are active in the category, which obviously makes growth in this space very competitive. And I think it's really interesting. I think for a brand to steal market share in a category of this size, it isn't about expanding the overall market. It's more about capturing share of mind from competitors. And that's what we're really starting to see with Lavazza. So in August of last year, they launched its Pleasure Makes Us Human campaign. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
So the Steve Carell and John Krasinski.
Yeah.
It is. So
That's
they did
right,
one, I think,
yeah,
with just the
yeah.
robot, and then they maybe followed on with the two guys, and it's so good. Like they're playing themselves,
it's
but
brilliant.
kind of
Yeah.
see, and there's one kind of literally outtake that's in one of the ads, like "Watch your back" or something like that, and because he bends over or something, goes, "Oh, watch your back," and the two of them just break their hearts laughing, and it's just I love it. I love it. It's so good. So it's so enjoyable, right? I love
It
enjoyable
is.
advertising.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely brilliant, and it's exactly that. Features Steve Carell, John Krasinski, and introduces Luigi the robot. And effectively, what the campaign looked to do, for context for listeners, is to create an emotional connection by highlighting that pleasure is a uniquely human experience. And essentially what it looked to do is reinforce Lavazza's identity as more than just functional by positioning them as joyful, warm, full of personality, and really looking to kind of lean into celebrating the experience of enjoying a cup of coffee. And as Grace, who's part of the singles team, said, why is it always robot content that gets me in my feels? And emotional storytelling, as you just highlighted, Connor, it's something that's been a recurring theme in this series, right? And ultimately the data does support it. So the report that we launched last year that I've highlighted previously, the emotion effect, shows that as triggering positive emotions drive measurable results. And I think what's most important is we're seeing the impact that's having on their funnel metrics, and that's directly from this campaign. So from July of last year through to June of this year, we saw some really impressive top of funnel growth. So their awareness had increased 7 percentage points from 22 to 29%. Consideration had risen 4 percentage points from 13 to 17%. And interestingly, the strongest demographic growth was among males and females aged 35 to 54, and then as well as those 55 and older. And I think when it comes to the kind of categories competitor set, Connor, you touched on some of the work earlier on in the episode, but we saw sort of some mixed results in the same period. So, for example, Starbucks and Dunkin', they saw awareness decline, but consideration remained stable. Maxwell House, they declined in both awareness and considerations. That was from 78 to 75%, 41 to 34% respectively. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see essentially how this strong top of funnel growth translates into mid and lower funnel performance. I think particularly across usage and preference, which are the metrics that, we're going to look to sort of want to move the needle on. And as Dan highlighted during the American Eagle segment, we know there's one job to be done, which is driving that top of funnel performance. But ultimately, the important thing now is to see how does that trickle down and translate as we work our way through.
And when you're looking at the ads, the product looks wonderful in it. The way the coffee pours and it actually, the cup, like the Lavazza cup, like it's actually a really strong cue. They weren't cheesy with it. They were kind of looking for something that was engaging, humorous, enjoyable to watch with Luigi as well.
Yeah.
Like it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's so incredibly authentic as well to take on the US market as an international brand, to bring in that authenticity into a crowd that, like, when you speak to Starbucks and Dunkin', who are just so core American brands, so it's not dissimilar to how Bonds went about moving over to the US market as an Australian brand and leading into that heritage as they entered and started to differentiate. Because I think within coffee, I'm sure people have strong preferences, but it's such a high frequency purchase that what would stop you from trying of the days, or, so long as you can build that emotional connection. And I think they've done that phenomenally well. And I'm sure we'll see an uptick in the number of kids being called Luigi off the back of it.
Great name. Super Mario Brothers. That was a good movie. They've created something that's enjoyable. It does show superior product, and if their statements were around that is a superior product, I imagine that's kind of going to score, and that is scoring really high for them, which is great. Listen, before we go grab our Lavazzas, there were kind of a couple of things we were going to just touch on briefly, and we don't really have the wonderful tracksuit data for these, but two are kind of in the meme category, and it's just I just find this fascinating how things catch on. And I did ask Dr. Marcus Collins when I interviewed him about Demore. Do you remember Demore and how that kind of became a big thing? And so now, in the past kind of couple of weeks, we've had Final Boss, just like one picture with the bowl haircut, and this guy just blows up and is everywhere. It's like, how do you plan for that?
I mean, Yeah. It's such a wonderful part of the internet, and just,
Yeah.
it's like the pace that brands have to be willing to dive in and just adopt the cultural conversation, when
But
to
this
like
is the
dive in,
thing,
when
isn't
to
it?
not.
How do
But
you dive in and not on that, right? Like, what do you do?
I think I feel like it comes back to like being aligned back to core
Yeah.
audience, and where does it make sense? Like, I don't know necessarily if Lavazza should be jumping on the Ibiza Final Boss. If you can do it well, it just creates so many opportunities. And Jasper, you called on it before, like within the report of, Entertain or Die, it's having like brand
Yeah.
law rather than necessarily brand code, so that you can have more flexibility and there's less rigidity. So if
Yeah.
the Ibiza Final Boss is in line with core audience, and it makes sense to be able to capitalize on that opportunity, it's just great. I
And
just
like
I just love the
letting your brand, like one of the ones I saw was the Lego version. I am sure Lego had nothing to do with that, right? I'm sure that was
Yeah.
like but
Yeah.
isn't that brilliant? Like, where Lego are now getting all this kind of free branding for, and maybe they had
Yeah.
something to do with it. We could find out, I'm sure. But like, regardless, like it's there and it's become a thing, and it's just fantastic,
I mean, see, that's perfect
isn't it?
use case.
Yeah. I mean, it is though. It is fascinating, isn't it? And I think I know, as you called out, like it's one of the brilliant parts of the internet, but it's also just shows the pace at which it can move and operate. And it's how effectively one trending moment turned essentially a complete unknown into someone with a
Yeah.
social media audience, management, a clear USP. And I think when you've got somebody who, one viral clip later has over 64,000 followers, he has a coined nickname of the Ibiza Final Boss, and a brand that is instantly recognizable. It's just sort of, you think to like, what is the next step? It's that sort of, whilst it can be kind of flash in the pan, it's more about how do you make this a longer term play? Like, how can you make that into something more sustainable? There's obviously the quick wins, such as PR appearances, selling wigs, merch, that kind of stuff. Maybe see Luigi in one of the wigs, but like it's more about like, what does that longer term play look like? Because ultimately, for any brand to be able to sort of grow and continue to do so, it's all about sustainability. So like, how can it sort of almost invest itself into a brand that is sustainable sort of longer term?
The power is in that it is fleeting for brands, that it doesn't have, that you have the core brand platform that is consistent, the message that you're always showing up for, but then having the agility to say, hey, this is actually going to be our fleeting moment to jump on the cultural conversation, but we're not going to take it beyond that, because that would be tied. Like I saw someone referenced, it was the Gladiator 2 film, like a few weeks ago. And I think it was Richard again, actually landed in the comments saying, hey, 2024 wanted its post back. And so I think that's actually what's so great about these social opportunities, is that you capitalize knowing it will be fleeting, but you're so relevant in the moment and not trying to drag it on. It's relevant.
And I suppose like what it also sort of begs the question more broadly is for brands and their marketing strategies, is sort of how much scope is left for reactive marketing, because it's obviously a critical part to have your sort of your structure in play and how you're going to look to execute across the year. But to your point, Dan, exactly that, like when there are cultural moments that are and can be fleeting, having that ability to be agile, to jump on it and to be able to quickly react to it, again, to that reactive marketing piece, is also a really critical part of them playing into the cultural conversation, which is obviously something we were also talking about. So it's almost that sort of staying relevant and being able to sort of move quickly.
But then, as you said, like knowing when not to is as important. And then like, your community, if they want to, can do it, like the Lego example. But I think, Jasper, to your point, is like, what's next for him? And like, will he be at like London Fashion Week, modeling sunglasses? Like, who knows? And like, what's amazing is like he did so many things right accidentally. Like he's distinctive, he's memorable. Like it's amazing. But another one maybe is a good example on kind of how you can react to moments in culture in ways, and maybe this one is one people plan for, but they're good. I saw recently, obviously we're in kind of, the Oasis, we're just borrowing airtime in Oasis's world at the moment. But Aldi over here have a store in a place called East Wall, and they changed. Well, they got two Oasis lookalikes to graffiti over Aldi, and they changed the East to Wonder, so Aldi Wonderwall. And it's just like, it's clever. It got picked up. People are enjoying it. Again, it's just a bit of fun and humor, and it's reactive. But that tour's been planned for a year. So,
No, that is outstanding. I love that. It reminds me of Yorkshire Tea just did something similar in Oz with a huge billboard campaign, like proper tea, and then crossed it out for all Aussie jargon around this means bloody good. And
they're just clever. Last one on kind of cultural moments or what topical for me is the nothing beats Jet2 holidays theme. Like, it's the music, it's the voiceover, and it's everywhere, right? And what I found really interesting is it seems to be applied to bad moments. So, like a fight on a plane, nothing beats Jet2 holiday. And I'm just like, oh my god,
someone arrested at the airport.
Sound and voiceover that people recognize for Jet2, and it's being used everywhere for things that aren't necessarily hugely positive.
Yeah, I've mostly seen that jingle being used in like violent, awkward people fight in.
So what's that? Like, there's one where if you're in that brand, like, or maybe I don't know, maybe they're okay with it, but like, surely you're not. Like, you're kind of going, oh my god, like, what do we do here? Because we're being used as a signal of like just a shit holiday. I don't know, maybe they're just going, this is amazing. They're looking at their tracksuit data going,
First of all, I think Jess Glynn will be loving it because it's her song. But I think it's really interesting because I was thinking about this last night, because one of the things that it is also they're continuously iterating as part of that jingle is, of course, price and promotion, and it's that sort of £50 off per head, which is £200 off for a family of 4. Yeah, that's it. And it's that sort of thing where, like, whilst obviously it's being used in all these like various different examples at the airport or the pub or wherever, or on holiday, it is interesting, I think, how from their side of things, Connor, I think to your point, how they might be almost sort of reacting to this internally and sort of interpreting it. At the end of the day, across now thousands of touch points, they're continuously having this price promotion continuously reiterated. So actually, I think it'd be quite amazing to see how that's translated into bookings.
It's like, deep awareness of the offer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Disgruntled if it's over £50 or whatever.
And if you don't know when you're holiday and there's no fight, you'd be raging. That's awful. Well, listen, guys, thanks a million. Great to catch up. Lots there. And as always, it's great to have these conversations, not just about kind of our thoughts and opinions, although we do throw them in, but it's all backed by the power of tracksuit data. And as I said, like, what's great in these conversations, even for me, is sometimes I'm going, oh, you guys are tracking that. So, like, amusement events, that's brilliant. So it's a great way for people to think about, other ways that tracksuits useful, not just for brands and agencies, but kind of categories like that as well. So we will catch you again soon. Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys.
Well, what another brilliant episode of The Singles with Dan and Jasper from Tracksuit. And genuinely, I would love to hear from someone from American Eagle, Lavazza as well, British Grand Prix, Jet2 holidays, any of marketers that are out there from those brands that would like to chat to me about what we talked about in today's episodes. I would love to give you the opportunity to hear your side of the story. And that's what is great about The Singles. We're using tracksuit data, we're talking about hot topics, but we don't have all the answers. So would love to hear from marketers from any of those brands. Once again, thanks so much to Tracksuit for their support of The Singles. If you would like to find out more about Tracksuit and how you can have always on brand tracking for your brand, you can go to Go Tracksuit. And as always, thanks so much to Tracksuit for their partnership of The Singles. It wouldn't happen without their support. And if you would like to find out more about Tracksuit and how you can have always on brand tracking for your brand, or if you're an agency that wants to partner with Tracksuit, Go to gotracksuit.com and you'll be able to find out more. And I have Dan and Jasper's contact details in the show notes, so go check them out on LinkedIn and they'll be more than happy to chat to you and just explore and show you the dashboard. It really is incredibly powerful, and I am able to say that due to my first-hand experience. That is it for this episode. As always, if you have enjoyed the episode and can share it with anybody, as I was saying at the start of the episode, all the algorithms are working against us at the moment. It's really hard to get organic reach anywhere, and we don't have budgets to be really paying and promoting as much as we would like. So your support helps. If you can share, you can like, you can rate or review, it really genuinely does help. I'm sure you hear it in other podcasts, and we all say it because it is true. So really appreciate you tuning in as always.